All right, feel free to get started.
Okay, perfect. Okay, well, thanks everyone for coming. I know it's like super early and you probably don't want to sit through this whole workshop, but I'm glad you're here. And I'll try to make it as entertaining or at least as energetic as possible. And feel free to stop me at any point in time if anything gets confusing, if I say something that's like a little bit confusing, or if you need me to slow down, or if you have any questions, anything like that. Yeah, so just to introduce myself, I'm Casey. I'm the president of Texas Convergent. And for this workshop, I'm just going to go through what a pitch might look like or what elements are, or what a pitch consists of. So yeah, feel free to stop me anytime. So for the rest of this workshop, which won't be that too long, and I'll go through things pretty quickly, I'll just cover some key elements of a pitch. In other words, what exactly goes into a pitch? How do you even sell your product? How do you sell your MVP? And then moving into spike. So how can you stand out amongst everyone else? How can you influence people and convince them that your product is better than everyone else's? And then of course, end with questions. So any questions that you may have, just let me know and I'll try and do my best to answer them. I don't know everything, but I'll do my best anyway. So first things first, what goes into a pitch deck specifically? Usually what that looks like is this right here. So you're going to introduce your team, what roles each person is playing on your team. So just so the judges and people know who they're even listening to and who who they're listening to, and then move into the problem. What kind of problem you're solving, the users that you're catering to, the users that will be using your product, solution. And I'll walk through this a little bit more in depth, but this is just a high level overview of how to pitch a product and what your product pitch slide deck consists of. So first things first, your team. You'll have a team slide, and this just consists of your headshots, so pictures of yourself and your team, your names, and the roles that each person is playing. And when you are introducing yourself and your team is introducing yourself, one thing to note here is that you want to match your energy levels, right? You don't want one person being really super quiet and then some person just like screaming. You kind of want everything to be equal and of course maintain that high energy. So this is what that might look like. I didn't really fill in the information, but you can have like circles here, you can have squares here, you can have whatever shape you want, maybe not like a triangle because that's a little strange, but yes, this is a team slide. You'll have your team, maybe you'll have like a team name. Also, I'm talking a little bit fast, and if you need me to slow down, just let me know. But yeah, this is what a team slide might look like. You have your names, your roles, pictures, and it's very basic, and then you can just introduce yourself in the order that you have listed here. So I mentioned before that you're gonna be covering like your problem, your users, all of that, and you might be wondering what's the structure to this and like why does that even work? And that structure is encompassed by something called this golden circle. And this concept is by this really popular and famous and influential dude named Sinek. I think you can probably search him up, but he's created like this structure to help people present themselves and influence other people to jump on their bandwagon, whatever that bandwagon might be. And that could be like for a product, a company, anything like that. And in this case, it would be your product. So what we'll be covering is these three circles, not in the order that's listed here, but by the end, you'll have covered every single layer. So that's the why, the purpose of your product, the process, which is the how, and the result, which is the what. And I will go into these and strip down these layers a little bit more. But this is just an overview and how you want to think about presenting or pitching your product. So the first thing is the why, and that's the inner circle. And this is where you'll be covering your problem. So what problem are you even solving? Why is this a problem? What needs to be solved? And what is the size of the problem? So how is your product even catering to my need? Like what is it doing to add value or be useful to my life? And that's where you'll be covering the why. If you don't cover the why, people aren't going to be very motivated or influenced to use your product because what's the point if they're not even facing the problem, if it's just there for funsies? You want to have a problem that your product is actually solving. And that's what sells a product. If you're able to articulate that and articulate, this is why you need this is why you need to use this product, this is why it will add utility into your life. And that's covered in the why. And that's what you want to cover right after your team slide, because it'll keep people hooked in there and it'll make them understand this is why I should be paying attention to the rest of my pitch. So that's the first layer. Also encompassed in this inner circle are your users. So whose problems are you solving? Something that might be useful here is like your demographics. Like, are you looking at students? Are you looking at adults in the professional field? You kind of want to be a little bit specific here, because not all products are going to solve everyone's needs. For example, like if I were super rich and I had my own limo and jet, I probably might not need to use like Uber or something like that. You want to be very specific. Uber is catered to people that need to commute that might not have a car in the city or stuff like that. So those are things you want to articulate as well, especially within this inner circle. Just be specific about the users, your demographics, and what segments you're catering to. So also encompassed in this is how many people are impacted by this. This is a data point that's really good to include, because if you're only impacting 1 or 2 people, that might not be the most useful thing to build, because you want to impact as many lives as possible. So the more people you can impact in the most effective way, that suggests that your product is really beneficial to the world and it's going to add a lot of value, and it's a little bit more convincing for the judges to be like, yes, this is what we need to implement right now. And again, size of the target market, that kind of ties into how many people are impacted by this, but how many people are you impacting, and who are you impacting? Those are 2 elements to play into this inner circle. And then the next inner circle, or the next circle, which actually isn't the next one, it's the outer circle, which is the what. So what exactly is your product? Something here is something good to do here is just explain what is your product, what are your features of your product, and you don't want to highlight everything. For example, you don't want to say, if you have a product that includes like a login screen, maybe like a chat, those I wouldn't say are your key features unless they're actually really conducive to what your product is, simply because a lot of products do have that, but you want to highlight the main things, like what makes your product different from everyone else's. Those are the features that you want to talk about and expand upon. And you do have 5 minutes for the presentation or the pitch, so no need to go too in depth, but just highlight your key points here. And make it very clear about what your product is, because there's nothing worse than explaining what it is and people are still kind of wondering, so what exactly is it? So that's kind of like your what. And again, here, I kind of already mentioned this before, but what's different about your product compared to everyone else's? If you have something that's the same, like I mentioned before, like maybe the chat page or the messaging, you don't really want to talk about that because that's not really different from everyone else, but highlight the key things that makes your product different. And you should be really aware of what that is, especially if it's your product. For any product, you should be aware of how you're unique compared to everyone else. This is also where you'll do your demo, because what your demo does is walks through what your product is. It's one thing to say it, but it's another thing to show a visual of you actually doing a walkthrough and showing this is what my product is, instead of saying it in words, which could be a little bit abstract, but this makes it a little bit more concrete and a little bit more tangible. So the way the demo works, it'll also be super short, but you'll just actually walk through your demo and explain what is happening, either on if it's a video or if you're actually walking them through your demo, you'll be like, yes, so let's walk through the login page, and you'll highlight the things that you want your audience's eyes, your judge's eyes to look at. For example, if I say, let's walk through the login page, or let's walk through this feature X. We'll start with the login page. This is the button that you click on, blah, blah, blah. But again, highlight only the main things, because again, time is short. So you only want to talk about the things that are super important, that add a lot of value to your pitch. So yeah, that's the demo part. Then we go back into the second circle, which is the how. And this is where you're going to highlight your tech stack. What did you use? What tools did you use for your front end, your back end? You can talk about Flask, React, MongoDB, whatever tools you use, that's where you want to mention it here. And of course, don't go too in depth. This part shouldn't take that long. It shouldn't be a huge chunk of your time, because a lot of the time teams, I assume, will use very similar tools in their tech stack. And so that might not be a huge differentiation factor, but it's still really important to highlight here, because this is like the technical aspect of it. So how did you build this? What tools did you use in your front end, back end? All of that is really good to include in your how. And then, of course, the next part of the how is your next step. So if you were to continue this product and you were to continue expanding on this product, what are you going to do next? What features are you going to include? If you were to scale, how would your tech stack change? How would your tools change? How would your front end, your back end, how would that change if you were to scale? And then would you add any other features? Would you start expanding your market, your target market? Would you expand your users? All of that's encompassed in the how. And so what that does is if you have a future plan, or if you're able to highlight these next steps, it shows that you're thinking ahead and that there is potential for scale, because any product that's like really good has that potential for scale. And if you notice, like all the products that we all know and love, they're always scaling, they're always thinking the next step. So that's kind of what you want to do as well, to be a little bit more convincing and to convey that passion that this is something that's for the future and this is going to add a ton of value in the future. So that's the how part. And by now we've kind of covered all three rings. But to add that extra oomph, or like add some differentiation, there's something called spikes. And these spikes are different ways, different things you can do to make sure that your team stands out amongst other teams. And there are 4 things you can do to add those extra layers and add those like bonus points per se. And that's just including qualitative and quantitative data, analogies, and then energy. So with data, anytime you're trying to sell something or you're trying to convince something that you should do this and you need to buy this or you need to use this, data is so important, because everyone wants to have that data-driven approach. And if you're able to have that data to back up why people should do something, you're able to convince them even more than before that, yes, you need to hop on this bandwagon and do this, or else like you're missing out. And so you're kind of playing into FOMO a little bit here. And so qualitative data encompasses of anecdotes. So that can be if you were to talk with users, or if you have been talking to users to kind of test out your ideas, that's what you want to include here. Pulling quotes is really good here. You want to pull really good quotes. If someone says, oh, it's a good product, I love it, that might not be the best quote to use because it's very generic. But if you're able to pull quotes from people that are super passionate about an idea or about your product or your idea, and it's very specific, those are amazing, because that just shows how much passion someone has for your product, and it's a little bit more convincing. So specificity, really good here. Don't use any generic quotes like cool product, period. Those aren't the best, but that's what qualitative data is, and it adds a little bit of that emotional factor to it. Now, quantitative data numbers are really also important here. It's a little bit more analytical side. So qualitative, you're appealing to emotions. Quantitative, you're appealing to analytics and logic. So that's including just numbers with market size, success metrics. Anytime you're including numbers, it's convincing for those people that rely on numbers and analytics to hop on the bandwagon. So two types of people you're appealing to here. Analogies, so using comparisons, if your product is kind of hard to understand, that's when you want to use an analogy, saying we are the Uber of the fashion industry, for example. And that's what you want to use, because people have mental models of how the world works. And so if you're able to appeal to those mental models, it makes it a lot easier for people to understand exactly what your product is, what space you're working in, because they have these mental models of how these things work. So I know how Uber works. I imagine many of y'all know how Uber works and how Tinder works and all those really popular Airbnb, how all those works. And so if you're able to pull that in, you're just using people's existing mental models to explain what yours is. And that's just a lot easier to convince me and the judges and anyone else to use your product, because they know what it is. The last thing is just energy. So I'm sure people are so tired of Zoom right now, and they're so tired of just talking to a screen. And I can only imagine how tired they might be in the morning and such like that. So energy is really important to play into here. Being excited about presenting, conveying a lot of enthusiasm and passion. It makes things a little bit more fun. It makes things a little bit more energetic. And people are drawn to that energy, and they're more likely to listen in. If you can think about your professors that have like a monotone voice and have like no energy, like those classes, I literally hop off the Zoom the second they start talking, because I'm just not into it, and I'll just watch it later. But if a professor is able to teach with that passion, it gets you pretty excited to learn, and it makes you think, oh, this topic is super cool. They're into it, so I'm going to be into it too. So it's the same thing here. You want to be really excited about your product, because if you're not excited about your product, then it might be a little sign or signal there that it might not be the best product out there. So energy is important here, and of course, smile. I know 2020, there's always so much to smile about 2020, but yeah, smiling is just good here because you want to convey that passion, like I mentioned before, and just have that good energy, that good juju. Um, but yeah, just smile, and it makes people feel a lot more comfortable if you're smiling as opposed to if you're frowning. You're just conveying warmth, and that's always really good to include in a pitch, especially when you're just trying to make people a little bit more comfortable. So those are just specs to include or to be aware of, and to leverage into your own pitches, if you can. And yeah, and so the last thing, this is just a little summary slide, but by the end of your pitch, you should have already covered your why, how, and what. And those are the 3 layers of Simon Sinek's golden circle, which is just how to sell a product, how to influence people, how to get people to hop on a bandwagon. And if you're a little bit, if you're not convinced as to why this works, this is just a hypothesis, but I think people respond best to when you're able to communicate a message that appeals to all 3 of these layers in terms of like the emotions behind it, the behavior, decision making. All of those 3 things are encompassed by talking about the why, how, and what of your product. And then, yeah, and then just adding that oomph or that little fluff by incorporating the spikes. So that's essentially how you pitch a product, or pitch anything really, but in this case, it's probably most beneficial to talk about how you would pitch the product that you've made. And yeah, any questions to be related to this, or what a pitch deck could look like?